So normally in the 8 o'clock hour, you have Dr. Will Bolt, early American history professor at Francis Marion University, history chair at Francis Marion University. We talk Jeffersonian and Hamiltonian and the ebb and flow of early American history. Dr. Bolt had an issue this morning with the schedule that will force him to be here not force him, will allow him to be here Thursday instead of Tuesday. We got into a fairly extensive debate yesterday, Rev, on the Murdaugh trial. Now it's spelled Alex Murdaugh. It's pronounced Alec Murdaugh. Only in South Carolina can you get away with something like that. But I asked a good lawyer friend of mine and someone who I aggravate occasionally about legal matters. Patrick McLaughlin of the Wakila firm is with us this morning. Patrick, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
So I want you to take my analysis and say, no, you're way off base, or you may be somewhere in the ballpark here, and then offer a more detailed analysis from a lawyer's perspective. I believe that the guy killed his wife and kid. And I believe the reason he killed his wife and kid, I'm gonna give you some psychobabble for a second. And this is from the Hannah Pamplico Institution of Higher Psychology and Brain Surgery.
Very familiar.
Okay, you got a similar degree, I believe. I think Alec Murdaugh is like the majority of people. There's a portion of him that is good. There's a portion of him that is not so good. The portion of him that is not so good is sociopathic. The portion of me that is not so good, I don't believe is sociopathic. There's a portion of me that ain't good. I'll readily admit that. I wish it weren't the case, but it is, and it rears its head on rare occasions. But I think I have a moral compass that would disallow me from pointing a gun at my wife and kid and pulling the trigger. There are a lot of crap I'm capable of, Patrick, that I don't like to admit. I don't think that's one of them. I just honestly and truly could never imagine finding myself in a position that I could rationalize that. So that's the human complex. I believe that Maggie Murdaugh was about to file divorce or had filed for divorce, and the discovery they were going to find out Alec Murdaugh was not who we thought he was. He was not a wealthy, influential lawyer. He was a guy scheming and scamming his law office to the tune of however many millions of dollars. Is that in line somewhat with what you imagine reality is?
Well, I think that's somewhat in line with the theory of the case the state wants you to have in this thing, is that obviously, going back to the Hannah Pamplico psychobabble, if you look at what a sociopath is, its thumbnail diagnosis is disregard for others. And certainly we have that with Alex Murdaugh just from the fact of his theft from his own clients, who by all means, he's admitted, his lawyers came out and publicly admitted, months ago. And in fact, he's confessed judgment to over $4 million that he stole from Gloria Satterfield's children. So for a person to be able to do that to people who have suffered that type of tragedy and loss, there's certainly, you could armchair analyze somebody and say they're a sociopath. But as far as the theory about the divorce and things like that, well, that's certainly something that it sounds like the defense is going to challenge you on, right? If you go back to what the opening had been, which I thought was a pretty risky thing to say in the opening for Dick Harpootlian, to say that, you're going to hear from all these witnesses and not a single one of us is going to tell you that there's anything wrong with Alec and Maggie's marriage, which, good Lord, I looked at the witness list and there's only over 250, I believe, people who are named on the witness list. Boy, pretty brave to sit there and say nobody on that witness list is going to tell you that, is ever going to tell you that Alec and Maggie had problems. Of course they did. All marriages have problems. But I think that's certainly in line with the theory of the case that the state wants to push forward and now is going to be able to push forward based on Judge Newman's ruling yesterday, letting in the financials. And that is that Alex was living in a financial house of cards and that the check had come due, and that drove him somehow to commit something that even your 90-10 theory that you talked about, most of us, even that 10% we got that ain't good, would never go to. I think it's pretty clear that was also the defense's defense, is that his 10% isn't that bad. And I think you can see that from the way they laid out just how horrific that crime scene was in their opening, where they got so graphic about it. And, you know, a lot of people, unfortunately, can probably see we have spouses kill each other all the time. And it's not unusual for spouses to kill each other over money. But the leap of killing your own child over something like that, I think that's where the rub comes in. And the question is the state going to be able to convince the 12 jurors who ultimately will be making that decision of that?
And it's not a preponderance of evidence. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a criminal trial. I mean, I've read more than you care to imagine, and I understand a little bit of it. So from a lawyer's perspective, what has been some of the most effective moments for the defense and the prosecution from someone who trials cases inside a courtroom such as yourself?
Well, I think certainly the most compelling witnesses so far in this case have been the regular folk who have testified. The two young boys who were friends with Paul that testified earlier. There was another friend that testified yesterday. I didn't get to watch very much of his or listen to very much of his, but the Rogan fella who had the dog that was the subject of the Snapchat video. The other young man that testified that day, I think his name was Will Loving. Those two witnesses were very, very compelling. Obviously, yesterday the caretaker for Alex's mother was incredibly compelling, because that lady was scared to tears being on that stand. And so those have been the witnesses who have been compelling for the state. And keep in mind, this is the state putting them up. So when those witnesses if those witnesses at all, if the jury connects with them, that's the jury connecting with witnesses the state have called and put on the stand, and that's good for them. Now, the flip side of that is, you know, the defense did, perhaps to their own detriment with those two young boys, get into their knowledge of the relationship Alec had with Paul and Maggie, and that they could never see this coming. I say to their detriment because that is what Judge Newman ultimately found opened the door to letting all this financial stuff in. But I think maybe the simple fact that the phone testimony that came out, where it seems to be that they got out that Alec was walking with his phone at the same time Maggie's phone was not moving, and it had the orientation change. And so, you know, it very, very clearly, or I shouldn't say clearly, but it certainly seems like you can make the argument that Alec was not near Maggie's phone then, and she's supposed to be dead. And somebody else is moving it, so is there someone else? That testimony I thought was pretty effective for the defense. But overall, it's the main concern I have is you have to go into this case, if you take it, you have to acknowledge the reality of this case, which was that the financial stuff was coming in. You had to assume it would come in.
So it doesn't surprise you that information is now admissible in the murder trial?
No. I mean, you know, listen, you have to prepare for the worst all the time in the case if you're a trial lawyer, right? And you have to assume that stuff is coming in. Quite frankly, I believe the most effective way to have handled that would have been to embrace it all and wrap your arms around it at the beginning of the case if you're the defense.
How do you do that?
And instead of getting up and talking about how honored you are to be there to defend Alec Murdaugh, you get up and say, let me tell y'all something about my client. You ain't going to like him. He's a liar and he's a thief. He stole from his clients. He has lied to his family and friends. He has ruined his family's good name that has been good in this county for generations. But he didn't do that. And then you make your entire defense out of the fact that they're going to make this whole trial, Mr. Waters is going to make this whole trial about proving a financial crime. And let me tell you a secret. He's going to prove it because we admit it. But what he isn't going to prove to you is a murder case. And here's why. And to that regard, they've given you a lot of mother's milk to make that argument. As is often the case, prosecution is over trying that aspect of the case. All those guns they put in the other day. Why? Why are you putting all those guns in? Was that expert able to say a single one of those was the murder weapon? No. Well, why are you putting it in? Why are you wasting your time? And if you're the defense and you've framed your case to admit all that financial stuff, then you get to get up when they do all those things like that and basically point out to the jury that these guys are wasting your time. None of this matters. They're not offering you any real evidence that Alec killed Maggie and Paul.
Okay, stop there. Is there real evidence, as far as you're concerned, that Alec killed Maggie and Paul?
Well, I mean, there's real evidence they're dead, certainly, because you got 2 dead bodies.
Correct.
There is a wealth of circumstantial evidence that Alec did it. But the lawyer's job is to point out that ain't evidence he did. You know, there before the grace of God go any of us. Any husband could come home and walk into a murder scene and find people he loved brutally murdered. Anyone who finds that could react strangely, could be confused when they sit down and give not 1, not 2, but apparently 3 recorded interviews and make mistakes. So you've got a lot of hurdles that you've got to get over as a defense. But, you know, at the end of the day, the state needs to answer the questions for the jury. And what you could do as a defense, an effective defense, is just keep pointing out they're answering questions for you that do not matter. They are refusing to answer the questions that really do matter.
The fact that we don't know, Rev, do we have a call? Okay, We'll get to the phone in 2 seconds. The fact that we don't have the money accounted for, is that relevant to the murder case, or is that, obviously it's relevant to the financial crimes case? But I mean, I've done some math in my head, and there's a lot of money that we can't account for. Does the state need to try to intertwine the missing money and the likelihood that motivated Alec to do, this horrific crime that they're suggesting and charging him with?
Well, the question becomes, if you're the defense, how big of a deal do you make of the missing money?
Because it's a lot of money, isn't it? By my counting.
I mean, supposedly it's upwards of $10 million. And, you and I were talking off air a little bit before. It take a lot of vice to burn through $10 million. Mm-hmm. And that's the question that the state's purported motive should raise in anybody's mind. Okay, this was all about money. Where in the world is it? What happened to the money?
Isn't that what the lawyer was suggesting yesterday in the beach boat case when he said, I know when they said Alec was broke, and he said, I knew he couldn't be broke because there are trials that are settling or cases that are settling, and Alec's involved in settling the cases. I mean, as a layperson, I don't understand the way that world works as you do. But I got to believe that he's basically arguing there's money somewhere. I don't know where it is, but there's money somewhere.
Well, I mean, the lawyer you're referring to is Mark Tinsley,
correct,
who is the civil attorney who has represented the Beach family. The Beach family being the young girl who was tragically killed in the boat accident. And of course, that's the state's theory of the case, is that Mark pushing to get that financial information is what brought Alex's financial house to, the cards to a head. They were all going to tumble. And
may have been the motivation for him to do this horrific.
That's right.
crime.
Well, and I think what Mark is referring to is the fact that, listen, if you know anything about Hampton County, and you know anything about that law firm and that family, and I think Mark said it during his testimony, like, listen, it wasn't just that I didn't believe he didn't have money. My client's family believes this family has generational wealth. They weren't going to buy it. So if you're Mark, how are you going to sell settling for $500,000? I think he testified that they were saying, oh, maybe he could scrape together $1 million, to the Beach family who has lived in Hampton County and knows the image that the Murdaugh family has portrayed financially for generations. They look at that as pennies for the life of their daughter.
Kind of an insult.
That's exactly right. And I think that's what Mark was trying to explain yesterday was, listen, I didn't have a number in my head. The number that it was going to take is going to be the number they don't want to, the number that was going to hurt. Because, at the end of the day, a family who goes through that type of loss, justice is, like Mark said, a pound of flesh. It's got to hurt a little. And Mark, they were not allowing Mark the information to know whether or not it was really going to hurt.
Let's take a call if Patrick doesn't mind. He's a trial lawyer. I know he doesn't mind. let's go to the phone, then we'll take a break.
Cocky Mike is on the line. Hey, Mike.
Hey, man. Hey, guys. How's it going? Hello to your guest there, because Ken, he has pretty much said everything, that I was going to say calling in this morning. I don't know if your guest heard my call yesterday, but I told you yesterday, how the morning of the murder, when the bookkeeper came and approached Alex about the $750,000 check that was missing, that was the first indication from the law firm to Alex at that time. And then what happens? Mark Tinsley is the very first witness yesterday, and he blows that out of the water and starts explaining that he knew Alex was hiding his financials from him, and he didn't know why. And now he does, because they had a court date of June the 10th, which is just 3 days after the murder, where all this was going to have to, the rubber was going to meet the road, and all of this was going to have to be disclosed. So, but I'm sorry, what is your guest's name? What's your name, sir?
Patrick McLaughlin.
Patrick. Okay. Hey, Patrick. Patrick's saying, he dittoing me. If you subscribe to he killed his family because he was going to try to cover up financial crimes, then Mark Tinsley just absolutely was a foundation of that belief to tell you everything. He was an extremely effective witness yesterday for that avenue and for that belief. But again, I don't know that any of that is worthy of killing my wife and child. Now, like you said, and like a lot of people say, well, a bunch of people kill their wife. And I subscribe to the two-shooter theory, and I always have. So I'd be interested. The kids that were put on, I don't know how that helps a prosecution, because every one of them said, I love Mr. Alex, I love Miss Maggie. They had a great relationship. They treated me like family. They treated me with respect, and they just welcomed me into their arms and into their home. So I don't know how that helps. I don't know how that helps the prosecution. So.
Hang on to that, Mike. We're going to take a break. Can you hang around one more segment?
Sure, no problem. Patrick
McLaughlin, a trial lawyer with the Wakila firm, is here with us trying to break down from a lawyerly perspective the Alex Murdaugh case that South Carolinians. See, when you've got an unserious host, you got to find serious guests, and we found a very serious man to come in this morning. Patrick McLaughlin is a trial lawyer who enjoys trying cases. I read a lot in preparation for the radio show. 96% of all cases are plea bargained. They never make it to trial. You probably should have left before we start this segment, because I want to drag you off into the way, kind of the realm of the unknown.
Let me buckle up.
Okay, and you like this stuff as much as I do. Patrick doesn't run from controversy. I know that to be true. Quite the contrary. When all of this news began breaking, I wrote down a word: Ozark, the Netflix documentary. Is there going to be Mexican drug cartel, Chinese businessmen, and Russian oligarchs? I don't know what's out there, and you don't know what's out there. But is that such a crazy idea or notion or theory to have? If we've got north of $10 million missing, and we really don't know where the money is, we've got one of the goriest murder scenes in the history of South Carolina. Am I crazy? Are we crazy not to consider that as one of the viable options?
Well, I don't think you can say it's crazy, especially when you look at the fact that you had early on in this saga, a vast amount of South Carolina who have probably never heard of them heard about a group called the Cowboys as a result of this case, who is a group of folks in that area that engage in nefarious criminal activity. In fact, that came out, I believe, during trial when we had the one officer early on who was testifying, and he talked about Alec had been involved in a case, had brought him in to be the gang terminology expert. I don't know if you remember that witness.
I do.
But so that got brought up a little bit, that he had prosecuted a case involving that group. And I believe it came out on the stand about how dangerous that group had been. But, we go back to what we talked about, and that is, where's the money? And that's something that nobody can answer yet. And so when that question is left out there unanswered, people are going to come up with their own conclusions on it.
Do you think we get that question answered during the hearing? I mean, the jury will decide, and I want to get to the jury in a second. The jury will decide guilty or not. But as we progress through the information and trying to paint the story, and you said it earlier, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, there's a theatric to this. There's a storyline. It's interesting what you said earlier about the guns. It confused me. You bring a gun and then another gun and another gun. Are you arguing that that's the gun you think the murder was committed with or not? And there is a theatric and a storyline to this, Patrick. Am I right?
Well, in good lawyering, there should be. Quite frankly, it seems a little scattered. I don't know that I have really grasped a coherent thread yet, weaving through these cases. Now, I'm sure the state's argument on that would be, well, we really weren't sure if we were going to be able to get this financial stuff in, so we weren't able to start our case with that theme from the beginning. But it should be, for good lawyering, is to have a coherent thread coming through it. Now, whether or not those questions get answered, I don't know how they would be. I mean, all right, let's play your Ozarks theory out. If that's true, if there is cartel involvement or something like that, well, it would have behooved Alec to come out and say that already, right? Well, and if that is in fact the reality, what happened, there's a reason why he hasn't come out and said that, right? Because he's not going to say it because it could put other family members in jeopardy.
Sure.
Well, that ain't changing no matter what the jury says, right?
So how big a case? You're talking about, you don't think anybody's painting the picture as well as it could be painted. I don't think you're knocking on lawyers. You're just saying, I think there's been some missed opportunities there to create a narrative and spin a story that the jury would completely and totally understand and maybe buy into. How big a deal is this for an AG's office in a state like South Carolina prosecuting such a prominent and established figure in South Carolina politics and judiciary? I mean, what's at stake here for the AG's office?
Well, I'll tell you how big it is for the AG's office. It got the AG in a courtroom.
A couple of days in a row.
That's right. It's been a while since that happened. So I don't think there's any doubt that this is the largest case that the AG's office has prosecuted in a courtroom probably since back in the Home Gold cases. Do you remember those? I mean, probably since then. I mean, you've been around a little bit longer than I have.
But I remember that case well. That's in the upstate with a lot of it's similar to that. A lot of noted people and personalities creating hardship and crime in the upstate. Okay, let's stay in this lane for a second. So what happens to the AG's office if they don't convict Murdaugh of these murders?
Well,
I mean, and here's what I'm saying, because you and I share this. Nobody in that courtroom is eating what they kill. You do, I do. I mean, if we don't get ratings on this radio show, we don't stay on the air but so long. If you don't try cases and win cases and settle cases, you don't get paid. The AG's office is a branch of government. It's a division of our state government. If they lose the case, they don't miss a paycheck. They have another week of vacation. But so what motivates the state to be as good as they can be and have to be to win this case?
Well, I mean, you're not going to be a lawyer and step into a courtroom if you don't have a ego and B, a lot of pride. Okay, so there's not a lawyer in that courtroom that wants to lose. But let's be candid. Alec Murdaugh will never see a free ray of sunshine another day in his life, right? I mean, he's not getting away from the financial crimes. And that to me is one reason why, the best defense in this case would have been to wrap your arms around that in the beginning, right? Because you're going to jail for the rest of your life, man. You ain't getting out. So at this point in time, we're talking about whether or not you're going to be remembered for killing your wife and son or not. So at the end of the day, he's going away to jail for the rest of his life. So whether or not the AG's, if the AG's unsuccessful, if it's, a hung jury or now not guilty, what I would suspect would happen would be maybe you see some of these financial crimes get tried before a retrial of a murder case, right? And you get it like, you convict him, he pleads, he gets sentenced to whatever in federal jail. You take your time bringing this back up for a murder trial, whether or not you need to or not. Because this thing's going to wind up costing. I mean, we're going into what, day 12?
Mm-hmm.
Day 12 or something like that? Man, we ain't even gotten started on this.
How much longer do we have, Patrick?
I want to say like last week, I believe Judge Newman issued some type of administrative order, like extending this thing by 2.5 weeks. And I think originally it was set maybe for 3. So, and that's one thing that.
So we're off into March.
Well, that's right. That's one thing that probably a lot of your listeners do not understand. Man, trials are hard. They are physically, mentally, and emotionally draining.
For everybody.
For everybody. I mean, you got to understand something. Those lawyers, when this case is over every day and the judge adjourns, they're not going home and picking up their lives and resting and relaxing. They're living with this thing nonstop. They're waking up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and not being able to go back to sleep because they're thinking about things. It is, I can't fathom. I think the longest trial I've probably ever been in was maybe 6, maybe 7 days. I can't fathom trying a case this long. It is going to, these lawyers are going to be war slap out by the time this thing is over.
Last question. Why did the state not ask for the death penalty? If they believe Alec Murdaugh committed these crimes, I've heard the narrative, not seen some of the gory details. Really don't want to see. I mean, I'm not crazy about seeing a kid with his brain laying beside his feet. Ain't something that floats my boat. But having said that, if the state believes he's responsible, how do they not ask for the death sentence?
Well, you get a whole bunch of theories amongst prosecutors on the death penalty. A lot of them feel like it's a waste of money to go after it because it makes trying the case exponentially harder. It prolongs the case if it's a death penalty case. And let's face it, here in South Carolina, when's the last time we put somebody to death? So it's going to cost more, be harder, take longer, and at the end of the day, they're not going to get executed. So why make the work harder if you don't have to? That's the theory on why you don't do it, right? Morally speaking, is there a good answer to that? I mean, if you believe this guy is that cold-blooded to have done what he did, and you believe in the death penalty, then how do you justify not going after the death penalty in this? Well, that's a question that I don't know I have an answer for.
Alan Wilson makes that call. I mean, the AG of South Carolina makes that decision.
Well, it's his office who's going after it. You would think so. And
AGs normally run for governor eventually at some point in time. I hate to put politics in the middle of it, but you know that as well. I mean, you're chuckling under your breath, but that's got to be taken into consideration. How does this potentially affect my political future?
Yeah, well, as much as I'd like to beat up on Alan Wilson, I mean, I don't think it's not unusual for prosecutors not to seek the death penalty nowadays. I mean, it really is. I can't remember. I recently agreed to associate on a potential capital case for the sheer fact of just to be able to associate on one because we have so few here in the PD that you have to watch. I think you have to second chair 2 to be death penalty certified. And I've been practicing 20 years. I've never even sat on one. That's how rare they are nowadays.
Gotcha. Thank you for being in.
Hey, thanks for asking.
Patrick
man.
McLaughlin, I'm going to hold him to this. As the trial progresses and we have questions, and we will, I'm going to reach out to him and see if he'll join us once again, maybe once or twice, as we head closer to a decision on whether Alec Murdaugh will be charged with double murder or not. Take a break. Back in just a few.